From the EPR Creations studio, this is Jason Staples bringing you Unconquered with Doc Staples. This podcast, as always, is brought to you by EPR Creations, by Louis Marquez of Keller Williams Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, by Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, by Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, and by my newest advertising partner, Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage. As always, information's in the show notes. Let them know you heard about him from the Unconquered podcast with Doc Staples. Whew. All right. Well, this is the Hot Takes podcast after Florida State holds on against rival Florida 24-15. And you know what? Any win over a rival, as we talked about after the Miami game, any win over a rival is a beautiful thing. It just is. And I'm going to say this right now up front. 12-0 regular season, wins over your rivals. This is a successful season, regardless of what happens from here. Florida State has had a successful football season, regardless of what happens from here. Now, obviously, you hope that they're going to be in position to finish out this season with at least one, maybe more, wins than that. But hats off to Mike Norvell and that entire staff and every player, every support staffer, every trainer, every strength and conditioning coach for the job that they've done this year. That's one of my first reactions to this game is, look, this is a banged up football team. This is a football team that has lost a Heisman Trophy candidate at quarterback. It's a team that, has been a mash unit on the offensive line most of the season. It's a team that has had, a variety of bumps and bruises, I think, beyond the norm. Look, I because I get to cover more than one team, I get a little bit more than most in terms of a sense of what's normal and what's not, because I'm covering two teams very closely. And obviously there are national people who cover a lot of teams, but they're not normally covering more than one team closely or watching one team really closely, even when they're covering nationally. Now, there are a few exceptions to that, and I respect those folks because they're working hard. But FSU's been banged up. They've gone through a difficult schedule, and I think a more difficult schedule than is appreciated at this point. Because when you actually look at Florida State's schedule, they happened to play several teams at difficult spots. So that was a very physical game to start the year against LSU, for example. And that's an LSU team that basically nobody else got to play. With a healthy Wingo, which it turns out Wingo was much better than Mason Smith this year. With a healthy Wingo, with all their defensive backs and everything else, basically after the first month of the season, LSU was down to third and fourth string in the secondary. They couldn't stop anybody. Florida State played a better LSU team than anybody else did. Then that Boston College team was a physical football team up front. Clemson, a very physical football team and a very physical game. Virginia Tech, not a really good team, but better than I think we all appreciated at that point once they'd switched to that quarterback. And again, a physical team. Duke, a physical football team. And, they're going to come after you on both lines of scrimmage. Pittsburgh, not a good team, but a physical one. Miami, for an FCS team, they really do play, they play physical. And then Florida. So that's a lot of teams on this schedule. I think an unusual number of teams on your schedule that are line of scrimmage teams that are coming in and they want to bully you on the line of scrimmage. And, you look at, these Big Ten schedules and all of that, and those are teams that want to, be line of scrimmage teams and bully you on the line of scrimmage and all that, all you want. But they don't have any players. You look at the schedule that Ohio State and Michigan played this year, And if you traded them out for Florida State's schedule, it's a completely different year. I mean, look, Michigan's a really good football team. Ohio State's a really good football team. I'm not sure either one beats LSU in the opener, just because of the weapons situation and needing to score points. Look, this has been a really, really good Florida State team. And I want to get that out of the way just up front, because coming in and doing this with your backup quarterback, with a banged up offensive line that doesn't have, three of the guys that you would want to start in their various spots. You'd probably, if you had your druthers, you'd probably have four guys in different spots on the offensive line than what you started today. Still went out and won the football game. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get to actual discussion of the game itself. So 24-15, obviously a game that felt close, on edge all game. Going into the fourth quarter, Florida State's down a point and then finished with a 10-0 fourth quarter. So on the one hand, a really close game. And you look at the overall yardage and everything else. Florida State, 224 total yards. Florida, 232. And yards per play, 3.9 apiece. So in a lot of ways, this was a coin flip type game. This was a very close football game. However, when it came down to it, this game actually could have been very, very different. I think all of this game broke Florida's way in exactly the ways that it needed to for Florida to have the best chance to win this game. I got a text from somebody at one point that said, man, this game is going exactly how you said it would have to go for Florida to win. Yep. And Florida State still managed to come out and win that football game. Got to give them credit. But end of the day, this game could have gone, you take some of those breaks early away and go a different way, and this game looks very different. This game could have gotten away from Florida early. But really, the things that changed this game in the first half were and you guys know, those of you who've listened to this show for a long time know I very rarely bring up officiating. Because as a rule, officiating is not, complaining about officiating is a loser's tactic. Because, officials are going to miss calls. Most of the time, stuff evens out. And, that is what it is. You just, and even, missed calls are usually close. And then you have ones like the personal foul call on Akeem Dent on a play that you get a sack, essentially. You get a nice hard hit on a sack, and then you get a personal foul call because when he's coming in, he's doing what he's coached to do and making sure he swipes at the football with a hand up, coming down to make sure that he can't throw the ball while he's being tackled. Good fundamentals, and you happen to graze a little bit of the face mask as you're coming down with no real force, and that gets called. And I can guarantee you that's what the call was. It's a bad call. And that takes you from a medium field goal to the next play being a touchdown. That game radically changes right there. Because you get that sack, and the defense is starting to feel a little bit of momentum. The defense is starting to feel pretty good. You get off the field with three, and maybe they missed the field goal. I mean, they were a little inconsistent kicking the ball. But either way, you get out of there 3-0, no problem. No harm done, really. You're in decent shape. And then the other play early that completely changed this was less of a officiating thing, but they were about a half a second off in terms of when that ball needed to be snapped for that fake punt, which hit. They had it just right. They had it perfect. They call that fake punt. You get that fake punt, all of a sudden now you're down around the 40-yard line. You've crossed the 50. You're in position to now start to be able to be a little bit more aggressive offensively. And in position to take control of that football game. Instead, now you got to punt it. And then you end up getting it the next drive after they sort of kick it around a little bit when you gave them great field position because you gave it to them on the 40-yard line on the in plus territory. They're able to leverage that into more points. And now all of a sudden you're behind the 8 ball. It's 10-0. It's a completely different game. You take those 2 plays away in the first half. One's just a bad call, and there's nothing really you can do about that. The other one, I don't exactly know why the play call or the play clock was such an issue in this game. I mean, I don't know if maybe they couldn't see them or couldn't figure out where they were. I mean, as a rule, that's the first thing you do when you go to a stadium. When you're working with your guys who are going to be in charge of that stuff, you say, okay, there's the play clock there, there's the play clock there. Make sure you're looking. But that was a serious problem today. We'll get to that in a moment on the offensive side. But the other thing is that clock hit 0 right as the ball was going to be snapped. Normally, there's just a tiny split second of grace period there when the ball snapped as the play clock hits 0. That would have been excusable to fall within that grace period. It was not well after the clock had hit 0. I was actually a little surprised it got called, especially since Florida had a couple in this game that hit 0 right as the ball was being snapped and it didn't get called. So there's a really marginal one, really close. I don't have a problem with the call, but it didn't help. And again, if you snap it a second earlier, you don't have to deal with it at all, and you still get that first down. Those two plays change, and this entire game takes on a different complexion. Because the real issue in this game early on was field position as much as anything. It was a combination of 2 things. The defense had trouble getting off the field on 3rd down in the first half. So you look at the first half, 3rd down conversions. Florida was 5 of 6 in the first quarter, 83% on 3rd down conversions. They were able to leverage some of that for what they ran 16 times in the first half, and they had 23 total plays in the first half. Florida State had 3. Well, three plays. I'm looking at that now. So much of that was just, again, Florida State kept forcing 3rd downs. They were actually doing a pretty good job of stopping the run, limiting the run on 1st down, getting into decent leverage. They got a couple 3rd and longs in there, and Florida was able to convert them. And I got to say, hats off to Max Brown, who played pretty well in this game against a really good pass defense. A couple of those 3rd downs, especially early, he made some really good throws. And FSU just didn't get off the field early in the game. And the consequence of that was, one, the offense didn't see enough plays to get comfortable. And the other consequence is that when they did get the ball, they had atrocious field position in the first half. I'm not seeing it here, but in terms of the overall field position in the game, it started to even out a little bit. But in the first half, it was not close. In the first half, Florida's getting it on, at or around the 50-yard line, sometimes on Florida State's side, and Florida State was getting it, inside the 5, inside the 10-yard line. And, this was a game where, in all honesty, the comp for this game was the 2011 game. You all remember that early in Jimbo Fisher's career as the head coach at Florida State. They played a game against a Florida team that they knew couldn't score on them. And so that game turned into just don't turn it over. Don't do anything stupid. And you'll remember FSU got the legendary shutout on that. Just make sure you tell Florida fans that the 2011 game was a shutout. It's always fun. But that was a game where Florida State knew going into that game that Florida couldn't score on them enough that as long as they didn't turn it over, they'd win the football game. And this was that game too for Florida State. This was Mike Norvell and the staff knew, look, as long as you don't let them have a bunch of chunk plays in the running game, and they gave up a couple of them early, didn't really after halftime. They locked that down after halftime. This team can't score on you. This team's not going to threaten you downfield. They can't throw the football with a bunch of consistency. And if they try, then ultimately they're going to start throwing interceptions with the young quarterback against your secondary. And you got a chance to win this one if you play conservative. You're probably going to win this one just on the strength of your freaks, as long as you don't turn it over and do anything stupid. So what do? Well, when you get the ball backed up inside your 20-yard line, or inside your 10 or your 5, you try to play conservative football. You try to just punt it out of there and give yourself a chance. Limit them to field goals if they keep getting great field position, that sort of thing. And then wait until you get a little bit better leverage. And that's what they did. Thing is, once they got better leverage, once they got better field position, that's when they started to attack. That's when they started to get a little bit more aggressive. And that didn't really happen until the second half. Well, final drive of the first half, they got a little bit better field position, and they got a couple runs that hit at that point, and then they were able to start getting Rodemaker in situations where he was going to be more comfortable. But they did not want to ask him to do stuff in the shadow of the goalposts, setting up in pass concepts that would ask him to do a lot, because they knew that the one thing that could beat them in this game is if he turned it over a bunch. They also knew that as long as they played conservative, Florida's probably not going to score enough points to give them enough of a threat. And so now you put those two things together and you say, okay, well, just keep biding our time. Don't be stupid. Stick with the game plan, run the football, keep doing the things you need to do, and then eventually it's going to pop. And that's what happened. And I was getting texts around halftime saying they got to get Benson out of there. They got to get another back in there, and they got another person texted in. They got 3 passes for every one run. They got to start throwing the football. This is just not going to work. We're going to get blown out. This sort of thing. And my response was, no. I disagree. First of all, there were a couple runs. There was space on a couple runs in the first half where Benson just missed the spot, just missed the crease. And then there were a couple that he did hit where they came close to busting. You go, okay. You look at that and you're like, all right, well, what we saw on tape, that's still probably going to be there in the second half, because it was there, just didn't have enough plays to have opportunities, to have trials to hit it in the first half. But second half, just got to get enough opportunities, get enough carries to them that a couple of them are going to hit. And it's going to happen. You just got to get there. You got to be patient. And that's the thing that, as much as anything else in this game, I so much respect about Mike Norvell and the way that coaching staff coached this game. They came into this game with a specific plan of what they knew they needed. And even though they went down 10 points, even though they went into the half down and generally losing the statistical battle, you look at the halftime numbers. FSU had 85 total yards. Florida had 184. FSU averaged 3.7 yards per play. Florida averaged 5. A lot of staffs would panic there. A lot of staffs would look at that and have the same reaction that a lot of people on the internet did. Mike Norvell and that staff looked at it. They looked at what had actually been happening on the field, and they said, it's all right. Stick with the plan. A little bit better field position. Get a couple stops on third down. Just stay with what you came in to do. And eventually a couple of these are going to hit. Eventually, you're going to hit that crease on outside zone. Eventually, you're going to hit a duo, and Benson's going to be able to make that cut and potentially score. You're going to hit something on counter. You just got to keep doing it. Keep putting yourself in those positions. And give Tate Rodemaker some opportunities to make some throws. And you can see, by the way, that Tate is by far most comfortable with Johnny Wilson of all the guys that are running routes for him. But you keep setting him up with comfortable throws. Just make sure you do that. You're going to get some opportunities, and your freaks are eventually going to do their thing. And they did. And ultimately, third quarter, Florida State averaged 6.2 yards per play. Florida 4.5. Fourth quarter, Florida State averaged 2.8, starting to, slow down a little bit there, especially at the end. Florida minus 1.7 yards per play in the fourth quarter. See, they figured it out on defense. They figured out what they needed to do. And as for the defense, well, Once they started handling the running game a little bit, they got some things. They started making some of those tackles. Linebackers were getting lost a little bit at times in the first half with some of the motion, all the eye candy. They do a lot of stuff that's sophisticated stuff in the running game. And with a quarterback who can move as well, it's complicated. And FSU was in bigger personnel up front and at linebacker, 3 backers and all of this. They don't do that all that much. Florida's going big. They're going to force you to do what other teams don't very often. And FSU had some, hiccups there, especially in the first half. Second half, they got that stuff cleaned up. They took care of that. And then what really happened is Florida State was able to score some points offensively. The offense scored some points. And then what they knew would happen as soon as they got a lead and Florida couldn't just sit on it and basically play keep away and try to shorten this game, they knew that they couldn't do that anymore and they were going to have to play more true offense. FSU knew that as soon as Florida started having to do that, then everything would change because then you're going to be able to tee off on the quarterback. He's going to potentially turn it over. And the moment FSU got up by enough that UF had to start throwing it, what happened? Final drive, interception. And again, that's why I'm saying in the first half, those couple plays in the first half happen differently. You get that stop and they only kick a field goal there. You get the field goal, the fake punt there. And all of a sudden you're in a different position. You're playing from ahead there. The defense at that point, I think, chokes Florida out early. And I think this game might be uncompetitive by third quarter. Hats off to Florida. I mean, I thought they had a great plan, both sides of the ball. They maximized what they were able to do, given the players that they have, given some of the limitations that they have in terms of roster. And yeah, I mean, hats off to them for taking advantage of a lot of those things. But again, once things got there, once FSU got ahead and Florida knew that they had to actually score to win this game, things changed up front. They couldn't block them. They could not block Florida State up front. And especially Peyton and Verse. And Verse, by the way, to me, is the player of this game. Benson, 3 touchdowns. He's the offensive player of the game. The overall player of the game to me in this game is Jared Verse. If you watch this game, he absolutely wrecked Florida's defense or Florida's offensive front over and over and over again. First in the running game. And he did this multiple times in key situations in the first half through the third quarter. And then once it came time to actually be turned loose as a pass rusher, we saw at the end what he's capable of doing. And that was a good reminder because some people might have been watching Verse this year and been saying, he just doesn't seem as explosive as last year. He's not making as many plays as he did last year. What's happening? Maybe he's gotten too heavy or whatever. No. The difference is that Florida State's asked a lot of him this year in the running game. He's been a guy that's been responsible for a lot of inside gaps. So he's been responsible for the B gap a lot between the tackle and the guard. And there's been a lot of times where he's been playing a Jimmy technique where he basically has to long arm the offensive tackle, keep his outside arm free for contain to take care of that C gap while peeking into the backfield a little bit. And if it is a B gap run there, he's got to cross the face of the guy who's blocking him and crash in and take that B gap and then either bounce the back or make the tackle there. He's taking 2 gaps a lot in the running game. And if he's not taking 2 gaps, a lot of times he's slanting into that B gap because they play a lot of light boxes. And normally Patrick Payton is not going to be the guy that they're going to have do some of that stuff as much. He's more of a true pass rusher. Now, in this one, they used some of Fisk on the edge to do some of that stuff, which I thought was a very good decision in this game. Gives you a third really big guy up front to cause some problems in the running game. And he did. That was smart. But Verse, when you're asking him to do that, then he has to stop the run first. And only after it's clear that it's a pass is he actually going to downshift and then get into pass rush. So it's run, peek. Okay, now pass rush. You're not going to get a bunch of sacks that way. But then every so often, he's turned loose as the designated pass rusher. And when he's the DPR, you know. We saw it tonight. You saw when he got that opportunity, he took a 365-pound offensive tackle and bowled him into his own quarterback and sacked the quarterback with the offensive tackle. That's a big, powerful offensive tackle that Verse just threw around like a rag doll. And then the next play went right around him and pressured him again. I mean, yeah, that guy's really, really good. And he was a major difference maker in this game. And when it came down to it, FSU knew that Florida couldn't block their front. Not for 4 quarters. And they knew that Florida had a limited number of points that they could score that were not off of, special teams errors or turnovers. And that it would take a great performance from a first-time starter at quarterback for Florida to have a chance at more than that. They knew that. And that's how they played this game. And that was the right call. So, end result of that was a tighter game than it seemed like it needed to be. And again, there were some opportunities missed. I mean, Keon Coleman dropping that touchdown. Yeah, he doesn't do that very often, right? That's a guy that comes down with that catch 9 times out of 10. You catch that one, and this game's out of reach even faster. So this was an opportunity to put this. They had opportunities to put Florida away earlier, and they just didn't. Now, moving forward. Well, first of all, stepping backwards, I was a guest on another show this week, and after doing some other coverage, I was asked from the Florida State side, which was the scarier game, Florida or Louisville? And my response was Florida, because I said, look, I think Johnson and Etienne, especially Etienne, are really dynamic players. And FSU's given up a decent number of longer runs on the season, decent number of chunk plays in the running game, and those guys are capable of ripping off chunk plays. And it's also a game in a hostile environment, in the swamp, against a quarterback who's shown the ability to make some tight window throws, inexperienced. You expect to get some turnovers or something like that from him, but still, if he plays out of his head, has enough talent to cause you problems, and a mobile guy at that. And then enough guys on defense to potentially force a couple turnovers from your inexperienced quarterback. Maybe something happens on special teams, and in that environment, maybe things get away from you. Well, you got through what I thought of as maybe the scarier game on that. Louisville, despite their loss to Kentucky today, still a scary game. Mostly because you're dealing with a Jeff Brom coach team, and Brom has had a whole lot of success being a giant killer at Purdue and also at Louisville. I mean, ask Notre Dame this year. So you know that he's going to give you the absolute best schematic. He's going to give his team the best schematic opportunity to win. He's going to give you the best shot they've got. And they've got some players. They've got a couple, one dynamic wide receiver, one dynamic running back, a quarterback who's been pretty good, great play caller and scheme guy. And their defense is really aggressive and a defensive line that creates a lot of pressure. So definitely a game you have to be concerned about. Not a situation where you go in and thinking, okay, well, look, odds are this team can't score more than 14 points or so on offense. So it's just a matter of don't turn it over. So you probably can't come in with the same degree of conservative game plan that you had for this one. But I think you also feel like you can move it on them maybe a little bit more reliably. And with this start under Rodemaker's belt and Glenn getting a couple reps in there, you feel maybe a little bit better about that going into the next one as well. So, yeah. Bottom line is you've made it through the regular season 12-0 with an opportunity to earn your way into the college football playoff. Feel pretty good about that. Have to feel pretty good about that. And now it's just a matter of getting in the cold tub and preparing for what'll be another physical game. I mean, Louisville's another physical football team. So, yeah, before I ramble on for the rest of the night, go ahead and wrap there. Talk again later this week. But yeah, a lot of good stuff in this one. And like I said, this is a good team win and a good coaching win for Mike Norvell and that staff. Talk to you soon. Thanks for listening. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating over at Apple Podcasts and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Post and repost episodes on social media and tell a friend. And if you haven't left a review in a while, do it again. It really does help the visibility of the podcast. Before we go, I'd also like to thank my advertising partners once more. That's EPR Creations, Louis Marquez of Keller Williams Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, and Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. You can also stop by the Unconquered Shop at unconqueredpodcast.com, where you can buy stickers, pins, magnets, t-shirts, and other swag. And thanks also to all those supporters over at Patreon, where I post video analysis and field questions for the podcast. I am especially grateful to those above the dynasty level. That is Andrew Garrett, Brian Leininger, Neil Cook, Casey Kidd, Chris Chartrand, Dave Blair, Hector Cartagena, Jack Horton, Jimmy Van, Jonathan Kennedy, Keith Cheney, Lee Caswell, Tyler Kashishke, Vince Calandra, and Bert Bertoldi. You all are far more generous than I deserve. I'm really grateful. Thanks to you all. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Jason Staples. Thanks for listening and thanks for your support. I made this.